In 1519, a small band of Spanish conquistadors landed in the heart of the Aztec Empire. They didn't know if they'd find riches or death. Led by Hernán Cortés, they were driven by ambition and the promise of gold. What they found was a world they could hardly comprehend. Tenochtitlan, the sprawling city of the Aztecs, stunned them with its size and wealth. The meeting between these two vastly different cultures was intense. It was filled with awe. It was filled with deception. It was filled with violence. Bernal Diaz, one of the soldiers, later recounted this encounter in vivid detail. A story of sheer disbelief and survival. As the conquistadors prepared for their dangerous journey into the heart of the Aztec Empire, one decisive action sealed their fate. They intentionally destroyed their own ships. Hernán Cortés was aware of the growing unrest among his men. He knew that mutiny was a real threat. Some soldiers were starting to question the mission, their resolve shaken by the poor conditions and fear of the unknown. But Cortés had a plan that would make retreat impossible. In a bold move, he ordered all the vessels to be run aground and destroyed. The destruction of the ships was not a rash decision. It was a calculated act that symbolized total commitment to the conquest. The men stood on the shore, watching as their only means of escape went up in flames. "We stood by watching as our escape route was destroyed before our eyes," Diaz later recalled. As the hulls cracked and splintered, the gravity of their situation became clear to everyone. There would be no turning back. Cortés spoke to his men, drawing comparisons to historical figures like Caesar, reminding them that they had crossed their own Rubicon. "We are with Caesar now," Cortés declared, and the men understood that their fates were now bound to this land. Diaz vividly remembered the scene. Thick, black smoke rising from the burning ships, the creak of timbers breaking apart, and the distant crash of waves against the shore. Cortés, ever the strategist, used the moment to rally his troops. He told them that victory would not come from luck alone, but through their own courage and trust in God. "It is by the grace of Jesus Christ our Lord that we will prevail in this campaign," Cortés proclaimed. For the men, the destruction of the ships was both a terrifying and exhilarating moment. Their fates were now tied to whatever lay ahead, and they marched forward with the knowledge that there was no going back. In Diaz's words, the die had been cast. As the Spanish marched closer to Tenochtitlan, the sheer size and magnificence of the city left them speechless. The road they followed was narrow, just wide enough for them and their horses, but it seemed far too small for the vast crowds of people gathering to see them. Everywhere they looked, the tops of temples and towers were filled with spectators, and the lake was packed with canoes. Diaz remembered the scene vividly. Neither men like unto ourselves nor horses had ever been seen here before. The curiosity of the locals was noticeable. People came from all around just to catch a glimpse of the strangers and their strange beasts. The further they traveled, the more impressive the surroundings became. Tenochtitlan wasn't just a city, it was a series of large towns rising out of the lake, with one even grander city at its heart. "We doubted whether all that we beheld was real," Diaz wrote, trying to capture the shock and awe they felt as the city emerged before them. White temples gleamed in the sunlight, and the bridges they crossed led them deeper into a world that seemed like a dream. The activity around them was nonstop. Canoes swarmed the lake, merchants shouted from the bridges, and the air was filled with the sounds of trade. Even those Spaniards who had seen the great markets of Europe were stunned by the scale of Tenochtitlan's market. The crowds seemed endless. The organization of the city showed a level of sophistication none of them expected. As they approached the heart of the city, the Spaniards realized they were entering a metropolis like no other. It was a thriving empire whose scale and complexity rivaled anything they'd known in the Old World. Diaz reflected on how the sights around them left them questioning their own senses. "The city of Mexico, in all its splendor," he wrote, "stretched out before us, and we were left wondering if any men had dared such a bold stroke as this." The first glimpse of Tenochtitlan was not just awe-inspiring, it was overwhelming. A city beyond their wildest expectations, full with life and riches. The first meeting with Montezuma was surreal, even for men who had already seen so much. As the Spaniards neared the city, the scene that unfolded felt more like a performance than a real encounter. Montezuma didn't walk out to greet them, he was carried. His sedan was decorated with gold and jewels, and his attendants wouldn't even look him in the eye. Instead, they spread cotton cloths on the ground so his feet wouldn't touch the earth. Bernal Diaz described it best. Montezuma himself was sumptuously attired, with jewels that glittered in the sun, and his feet never touched the ground thanks to the cotton cloths laid before him. This was power, Aztec style, on full display. Cortés, knowing exactly how much was riding on this meeting, played it cool. He dismounted his horse to show respect, but the tension in the air was thick. Montezuma, for his part, seemed to believe the Spaniards were gods, or at the very least, they had been foretold in Aztec prophecies. He told Cortés through an interpreter, "I have long desired to see you." To the Spaniards, it almost seemed like relief, as if Montezuma was resigned to the idea that this day was bound to happen. He wasn't meeting them on equal terms. He thought they were the fulfillment of something much bigger. Cortés kept the act going, flattering Montezuma and accepting his gifts, but underneath, the Spaniards knew they were outnumbered and deep in enemy territory. "We come from a great monarch, Don Carlos," Cortés said, reminding Montezuma that they had been sent on a mission to convert him and his people to Christianity. Montezuma didn't seem to care about that. To him, the fact that these strange men had arrived from the east meant they were part of a divine plan. Diaz later reflected on the strangeness of it all, writing, "This was not merely a meeting of men, but of two worlds colliding." Cortés knew that the Spanish could not rely on diplomacy alone to secure their foothold in Tenochtitlan. Despite Montezuma's initial hospitality, Cortés and his officers grew increasingly uneasy about their precarious position in the heart of the Aztec Empire. They feared an attack and believed that the only way to guarantee their safety was to seize Montezuma himself. After much deliberation, they made the decision to take the emperor hostage. The plan was bold, and the risk was immense. Cortés, along with 5 of his top officers, approached Montezuma with a fabricated accusation. The emperor had ordered an attack on the Spanish forces stationed near the coast. Cortés confronted him directly, saying, "You have commanded your generals to take up arms against us, and they have even killed one of my brothers and a horse." Montezuma, shocked by the sudden accusation, denied any involvement. But Cortés pressed on, telling him, "You must come with us quietly to our quarters, or you will die where you stand." Diaz recalled the terror in Montezuma's eyes as he realized the gravity of the situation. Montezuma was seized with such sudden terror at these words that he remained speechless for some time. The Aztec emperor, who had ruled over a vast and powerful empire, was now at the mercy of a small band of foreigners. Despite his fear, Montezuma eventually agreed to go with them, unable to risk his life in a direct confrontation. The Spaniards escorted Montezuma back to their quarters, where they quickly took measures to secure him. Diaz described how the once mighty emperor was led into their camp. His attendants were trailing behind him in disbelief. Montezuma's personal guard stood by helplessly. They knew they could do nothing to intervene. Montezuma had been reduced to a prisoner in his own city. The Spaniards now held the emperor captive. They believed they had secured the upper hand. They were still very aware of the danger that surrounded them, though. Diaz summed up the moment, writing, "We had captured the ruler of this vast empire right in the heart of his own metropolis, without a single sword drawn." After securing Montezuma in their quarters, Cortés and his men took the opportunity to explore the city, starting with its great market and the main temple. The grandeur of Tenochtitlan had already impressed them, but the scale of the market and the sheer volume of goods and people there astounded the Spaniards even further. Diaz, reflecting on the experience, wrote, "Some of our men who had traveled through Rome and Constantinople said they had never seen a market so vast, so well organized, or so crowded with people." The market was a center of commerce unlike anything the Spaniards had ever encountered. Rows of merchants sold gold, silver, precious stones, textiles, and food. Diaz described how even gold dust was meticulously measured and sold in thin tubes made from goose bones, worked to such a fine substance that the gold shone through them. There was order in the chaos, and the market bustled with energy as buyers and sellers conducted their business. The Spaniards, accustomed to European markets, marveled at the efficiency and sophistication of Tenochtitlan's trade center. The vast numbers of buyers and sellers thronged there, Diaz noted, clearly overwhelmed by the scale of activity. Next, they turned their attention to the main temple, the religious heart of the city. Cortés, determined to witness the infamous Aztec rituals firsthand, was guided up the 114 steep steps to the top. Montezuma, still playing the part of the courteous host, sent priests and high-ranking officers to accompany them. As they ascended, the city unfurled beneath them, offering a breathtaking view of the metropolis and the surrounding lake. Montezuma invited us to look down and view his vast metropolis, Diaz recounted, describing how the whitewashed temples and bustling streets below shimmered in the afternoon sun. At the temple's summit, the sight that greeted them was horrific. Diaz recalled the sacrificial story stained with fresh blood and the large idol in the form of a dragon surrounded by grotesque figures. Near these stood a large idol in the shape of a dragon, with fresh blood lying before it, he wrote, detailing the grisly scene. The Spaniards, horrified by the ritual sacrifices, saw firsthand the evidence of the bloodshed that had been described to them. Montezuma, seemingly unfazed by their discomfort, took pride in showing them his gods, oblivious to the shock and disgust that his guests were feeling. After witnessing the sacrifices, the Spaniards had seen enough. They left the temple with a growing sense of unease, having witnessed both the magnificence and the terror of Tenochtitlan. Thanks for watching. What other meetings between two cultures do you want to learn about? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like, subscribe, ring the bell, share this video with a friend, and all that good stuff to stay up to date on all the nutty stories from humanity's past.